we're here for a special Capitol Happy Hour today. I'm here with Director Don Benton, and you're the director of the Selective Service system now, and you work in Washington, D.C. We used to have Senator Benton here in the Washington State Senate for 20 years as a Republican from Vancouver, but he has moved on to the other Washington, and here we are. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me, Melissa. Always good to see you again.
Yeah, so I understand that you're going through Western Washington, your home territory, talking about why young men need to register for the draft. So your agency has a draft registry for young men ages 18 to 25, and you're here talking about why they need to do that and actually submit their registration. Can you tell me a little bit about why that's important?
The main reason to comply is not only because it's the law and because it's every young man's civic duty to do so. Over the years, Congress has tied a lot of benefits to the Selective Service registration process. So if you don't register, you might miss out on these benefits, and that's the important thing, and that's the message we're trying to get out to young men today is don't miss out on these benefits because you failed to register.
Well, I appreciate you joining me today to talk about this. As is customary on the show, we have tater tots, we have conversation. We moved it to Tacoma this week because the former Senator Benton was coming through Tacoma and not really Olympia this time, as I understood. So we're at Crown Bar in Tacoma, and we're going to talk more about your new job and the Selective Service and why young men need to register. So the Selective Service, as I think you might have just alluded to, hasn't overseen a draft since 1973,
Correct.
And our draft is now inactive, but you were saying that young men ages 18 to 25 still are required to register with the agency. Why is that?
Well, it's designed, as I said, President Carter is the one that brought back registration during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan as really a sign to the rest of the world that the United States stands ready behind an all-volunteer military should any national emergency occur. And so I think the likelihood of a draft is very slim, but it's like I always told my Boy Scouts, I'm a Boy Scout leader, as you know, have been for many years, and I tell them it's always good to be prepared. That's the Boy Scout motto, be prepared. So if something did happen, it would be very important to mobilize quickly, and it would be difficult to do that without the Selective Service system. So it's undoubtedly the cheapest insurance policy this nation has to insure against any national emergency.
So Washington State, I looked at the numbers, we're not doing so great when it comes to our rate of compliance with registering for the draft. I looked and it's fewer than 84% of men in our state.
It's about 83.4. The national average is 92%, which is, if you think about compliance with any law, a 92% compliance rate is pretty darn good.
Some have argued in Congress and elsewhere that the draft is hurting some young men by punishing them for those who don't register, and that those with the fewer financial resources in poverty in rural areas, like you said, may be the least aware of their obligation.
Right.
And those people might be the most harmed. Why penalize people for not registering for something that effectively hasn't existed since 1973?
Well, that's a great question for Congress, because I don't make the laws or the penalties. I just, as the director of the agency, I implement the rules and regulations that I'm instructed to implement by the President and the United States Congress. But I would speculate that members of Congress and members of the community at large believe that it is an important civic duty to register for the Selective Service.
So you've been in D.C. since basically the start of the year, right? Or was it sooner than that?
No. I actually, the President asked me to come on the 15th of January so that we could be prepared to work on the transition teams. Right?
Where do you live down there? Where do you live in D.C.?
I live out by Union Station. I rented an apartment out by Union Station. Nice little area that's been kind of redone over the last 10 years. This will be amazing for you because I actually use mass transit.
I was going to ask you about this. I was going to ask you about it.
So I walk from my apartment to the metro station, take the metro station into work, right?
The reason we're laughing about this is because you weren't thrilled with some of the plans to extend light rail from Portland to Vancouver. I know there was a lot wrapped up in that project, but you weren't the biggest fan of light rail during your time in the legislature, at least when it came up in your district. What do you like about the metro in D.C. that you didn't like about?
Even in the early days, Melissa, I opposed sound transit too. Okay, because I've never believed, and nor do I believe now, that light rail is the answer to congestion. It does work in areas where you have a population density that approaches 15,000 people per square mile. But unless you're going to be anywhere close to that kind of density, light rail has zero impact on the roads or the highways.
But in DC, it's different. You think the density is there? Okay.
Well, what you have is you have a central location where you have hundreds of thousands of people every day coming to a central location. So a light rail system works when you can reach out into Maryland, reach out into Virginia, and you can bring all those people to a central location.
So I did want to ask, initially you did serve for several weeks in a different capacity for the federal government. You were almost 3 months, I think, as the senior advisor, White House advisor to the Environmental Protection Agency. Correct. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
There were some reports that you had some conflict with the EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, and now you have a different role. It's reported that you maybe were shut out of meetings, that maybe there were some personality conflicts. What happened there that now you are not serving at the EPA?
I welcome the opportunity to address that because nearly all of those reports were nothing but fake news. Okay? Rumors, innuendo that have been reported by people that don't even know or weren't even in a position to know. So let me make it clear, Scott Pruitt and I have a great relationship. We got along great. Okay? We didn't have conflict over really anything. My job and his job were very much the same, and that is to implement the president's agenda. And so we did that. I was in a temporary role as the leader of the transition team. When Scott came, we're very happy to have him. I stayed on to help bring him up to speed with all the things that our team had learned during that previous 2 months. And I knew then that I would be leaving the EPA because I'm not the administrator. Scott Pruitt is the administrator. He was just confirmed by the Senate. My job was to prepare the EPA for the new administrator. I knew 6 weeks before I left there that I was leaving, and I knew where I was going. I just wasn't allowed to say anything to anybody.
I saw also there were some other reports you denounced from that time as fake news, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to correct the record on those as well.
Sure. There's plenty of them. I don't think we don't have time today to correct all of them.
I'm just going to get into one. So initially, people also seized when you were appointed, and it was announced, I guess, that you were appointed to head the Selective Service, that you were the first director that didn't have any military record, and
totally untrue.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you because later I saw your local paper did go and get your military record, and you enlisted at some point, and but that didn't show up in the initial stories, and it looked as if you didn't respond to requests for comment to clarify your record. Why?
There never were any requests for comment. Not one single reporter ever asked me that question until I was interviewed at least 3 weeks later by Clark County Politics, or Clark County Today. It's a local blog in Clark County, and I was asked the question by that reporter. Even my local paper, the Columbia, never called to ask. They just ran the story, and as did many papers. They picked up, I think, from either the Huffington Press or some anti-Trump paper that went and published this without ever checking. This is the story. I joined the Army in 1975. The draft had ended, I think, in '73. I joined the military right out of high school. I voluntarily signed up because I wanted to serve. I went in under what's called a guaranteed enlistment program, and so I signed up for a very specific schooling. They agreed, signed a contract with me. I went through basic training, was waiting to go to my school. There was no opening in the school. They had messed up the schedule. There weren't any open slots, and so the option was get an honorable discharge. I opted for the honorable discharge. Okay. So after 3 months successfully completing basic training, I took an honorable discharge from the Army and went back to the community college and got my training. So that's the story, but the fact is I was in the military. But the bigger story, Melissa, is it's not required. It's not a military job. We're not even part of the Department of Defense, right? And so where does this come from that, oh, you must have military experience? It's simply not required. It's not an important aspect of the job. Do we work with the Department of Defense if we're mobilized? Yes, of course. But we're a separate, independent government agency that manages a data file, a very big one, I might add, the third largest in the federal government, and manages an outreach and education department. And for that you need budget knowledge, people knowledge, you need to know how to manage numbers, you need to know how to manage people effectively. And that's the experience that I bring to the job.
Why didn't you include some of that information, though, about your military record in your biography, or that was written for you, perhaps, when you were appointed to head the Selective Service? It seems like that would have stemmed all of this off if you'd had some of that information in your biography that was released to the public.
I never felt it was relevant to the job.
There have been reports that you haven't always gotten along with your colleagues at the state legislature as well. Senator Ann Rivers did report that you called her a trashy, trampy-mouthed little girl at one point.
That's not true either, by the way.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you about that, too. How did that degenerate? And is there anything about, it sounded like you all exchanged swear words at some point, according to the report.
That's not true either.
No?
Okay, no.
So what?
Senator Rivers used horribly vulgar language on the floor of the Senate, violating the decorum of the Senate, and I reported it to the Secretary of the Senate. And in my report, I described her behavior as such. Never once did I call her anything, right? So in my report of her behavior, it was described by a newspaper as me calling her such and such. That is not at all what happened, right?
What did happen? What, you said she was behaving like a trashy, trampy-mouthed little girl, or how? No.
What happened was Senator Rivers used extremely vulgar language in front of 15-year-old pages on the floor of the Senate, breaching the Senate decorum, and I reported that.
The legislature, when they did look at it, seemed to think there was fault on both sides. You disagree with that? You didn't swear at Senator Rivers as well?
Never.
I know we always talk about this Washington versus the other Washington, and you're in both, sort of have a foot in both right now. I know you have an apartment there, but I think you're still registered to vote in Washington State, right? You're still
listen, my family and I are very much residents of Clark County.
I didn't make it mean that one to be even accusatory. I just wanted to ask.
We're on a temporary mission to help the president be successful and help make America great again. And that's really what we're doing.
I wanted to ask, so the thing I just wanted to ask is, when you're in Washington, D.C., what's the thing you miss most about Washington State? And when you are in D.C., is there something you wish you could bring back from that place? You know, we always criticize it as a swamp, a place of division. What, or that's common in Washington State, I should say.
The thing I miss most about Washington State is my wife.
That is a good answer, my friend, yes.
That's the thing I miss most. There's no question about that. And she said to me the other day, it's just like when you were serving in the legislature, but you're not home on the weekends. You know?
And is there something you'd like to bring back from Washington, D.C. that you've discovered over there that's just like, oh, this is a great thing, I'd love it, if I could just transport that over to Washington State and show my wife? Nothing? Nothing at all?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, it's still early. So we've been here with Don Benton, the director of the Selective Service. He was a former Washington State Senator who now serves in Washington, D.C., and he's been kind enough to join us here in Tacoma at Crown Bar for some thoughts and conversation on Capitol Happy Hour. And I want to thank you for coming today and giving us all your time and making this stop while you were back in your home state for a little bit.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to tell you what I'm doing, set the record straight on some of this fake news that's been out there, and to remind young men 18 to 25 to be sure to take 45 seconds on that website, www.sss.gov, and do your civic duty and register, because we don't want you to ever miss out on the benefits that are linked to that registration.
Thank you very much, and thank you.